Hey folks, happy belated Halloween to you all. Welcome to the Writestream. Resurrected. Today we are going to be talking a little bit about audience expectations and what I mean when I say audience expectations, because it can mean several things. And I wanted to talk about this. Normally I talk about characters next in like the arc of like the stuff I talk about, I guess. I would talk about characters next, setting, we did last week, characters, plot. That's the pyramid, right, of story. But the reason I wanted to talk about audience expectations is because I found out, with talking about setting, what we end up doing is crossing over a lot into the territory of genre. And genre is all about expectations. So contrary to, I don't know, what a lot of science fiction fans think, what defines a genre is whether or not it is meeting the expectations of the audience that consumes the things that go with that genre. Now, you can articulate what those expectations are and therefore define the genre, but it's really all about what people are expecting to get out of the experience. And if they're not getting an experience that kind of maps to what their idea of genre is, then they're going to think, they're going to feel deceived or think that something doesn't belong in a genre or just not like the experience. But that's only one layer of expectation. The bigger and more important thing with audience expectations has to do with just how you tell a story. Because through telling a story, you are going to set up a set of expectations, and how you play with them and how you deal with them with the audience is going to determine a lot whether the audience can be surprised, what kind of effect the story has on the audience. All the things that the audience ends up feeling when it comes to the story have a lot to do with their expectations about how the story will proceed and their expectations about what kind of content is going to be in the story to begin with. So I hope you guys are having a great day with all of that. Let's hop right into it. So we're going to talk about a story in general and the way the expectations work with the story. Then we're going to get into some specifics that may or may not apply to any given work or to your work or something like that. So the big thing when you're telling a story is you are establishing, hopefully when you're doing things like exposition, you're establishing an expectation in the audience's mind, in the reader's mind, or if it's a movie or a person playing a game or something, the audience there. You're establishing an expectation for what's going to happen in the story. And how you play with that expectation is going to determine a lot how the story feels to the audience, as well as how interested or bored they are in it. The truth is that if you deliver 100% on the audience expectations, they will get bored and they will turn off your movie, or they will put down your book. They'll put the book down and they just won't end up picking it back up again because they don't find it interesting enough to continue with. You have to give people a little bit of what they don't want in a story, believe it or not, in order for them to find it interesting, because conflict is a kind of tension. Tension is often something we don't want. Like in our real lives, we don't want tension between ourselves and our spouse. But if we're telling a story and there's a married couple, we add the tension in because the audience has a preferred state, of no tension that we're going to bring them to. It's the same thing in music. We create controlled dissonance and then we resolve that dissonance. The key system is all about moving away mathematically and then close mathematically to what's called the root of the key, right? So in your C major, C is the root, and you're moving away, you're moving closer to it melodically and harmonically. You do the same thing in fiction. There's a preferred outcome, a preferred state, and the audience is expecting a certain outcome to happen. And in a lot of cases, if you don't deliver on that expectation, regardless of how original your story is or things like that, the audience will be upset. An example would be, a superhero movie. We expect the superhero to win in the superhero movie. That's an audience expectation. Now, Can you surprise them by having the superhero lose? Absolutely. But will they recommend that movie? Will they say, oh, I liked this movie. I enjoyed this movie. I recommend this movie to my friend? Chances are they won't. Because built into the audience expectation for the plot is the kind of movie that they're seeing, which we'll talk about next. And having that movie resolve in a way that they really prefer, in a way that's expected for that kind of movie or that kind of art. Likewise, we expect some kind of resolution of the conflict. One of the things about a book like Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, if you've never read this book or tried to read it, it's a good example of postmodernism, maybe even postmodernism, really taken to an extreme. There's no resolution. The big jest is that you read a 1,000-page book and there was no story. There's not really much conflict. It's humorous in moments, and then it just ends. Like you turn the page and there's no more story. That's Infinite Jest. So something like that, your typical reader is not going to be happy with that. They would rather have a sad ending than just no ending. And that was, I remember this movie called The Thin Red Line that just didn't really have a story and any kind of resolution. And critics really liked it, but the average person that watched it was like, this was garbage. It's like, I liked this part of the movie where there was tension and resolution, where they were like trying to blow up this bunker. But then outside of that, it's just a bunch of nothing, right? It's a bunch of non-story. Okay, so the audience has an expectation that you're going to have a story, that there's going to be a conflict and some kind of resolution to that conflict, whether or not it's the resolution that they actually want. And in fact, anytime you're telling a story, you have to not deliver on all the audience expectations. That is to say, you have to do something original and something unexpected. Expectations, expected. So you have to do something that they don't expect. You have to surprise them a little bit. It has to feel original. It has to feel different from something they've seen before. Otherwise, they're going to just say, well, I could have just read this other thing rather than watch your movie. I could have watched the same movie that you did again. This is why originality matters. And so you will see critics complain that this thing is generic or this thing is a ripoff of this other thing. Why does it matter if something's a ripoff of something else? Well, it matters because we want originality. We don't want to be served up something that's exactly the same as something we heard before. If you bought like a new album from the Rolling Stones and it was the same songs with different names and maybe slightly different words, you'd be upset about that because you want new Rolling Stones music. You don't want the albums you already own. So those kinds of expectations in a story actually matter. Like we have to find ways of playing with those expectations and delivering an outcome that the reader or the viewer or whoever is going to end up enjoying. So let's say we want to have an outcome that meets the expectations of the reader. We want to have a happy ending. Well, if the ending, if the preferred state exists all the way through the story, there's no tension at all. Rather, we have to remove the preferred state from the characters and then have them fight to recapture that preferred state, and that's going to be the resolution. Not only that, but we have to have them fight to recapture that preferred state in lots of different ways. We have to go on a journey with lots of unexpected twists and turns. We have to have the fight occur in ways that are new and different to the audience in order for them, believe it or not, to feel like their expectations are met. So they expect a story to be a certain way. They expect certain things that are in a story. They also expect to be surprised. So part of meeting expectations is actually defying expectations to a certain extent in order to deliver an experience that they actually want. Let's transition to talking about genres. Okay. Genres are built around expectations, kinds of stories, kinds of settings, maybe even kinds of characters and kinds of plots. Like a mystery book has a mystery plot. If it's in the mystery section, that automatically establishes a set of expectations in the audience. And when it comes to genre fiction, the really hard part is delivering on all of those expectations and doing it in an original way. So a mystery, we have an idea we're going to solve the mystery. The satisfying expectation is that we're going to discover something unexpected in the mystery. The mystery is going to take us to some new and interesting places, and we're not going to be able to guess who done it at the end if it's like a whodunit kind of mystery. Something like The Sixth Sense was very popular because it had this surprise ending that people didn't see and they only understood once it was set up. If you hop on my Patreon or you become a member of the channel, you get this book for free this month. This is Eyes on the Walls. People always talk about the ending to this story. This is one of my most popular books, and one of the reasons that it's popular is because the ending really surprised people. It had a very different conclusion than what you would expect with a regular horror book, right? Or a thriller or something like that. There's an ending that's kind of a false ending that does resolve and fulfill audience expectations. And then that ending gets turned on its head and something different happens at the end of this book. Something really different from what you would expect in the kind of story that Eyes on the Walls is. A kind of, is there a monster living in the morgue? Becomes something really different when you get to the final conclusion of what's going on. It's a bit of a mystery, right? So we want to surprise people to some extent. Does this fit in the horror genre? Absolutely. There's a monster. We have kids trying to stop a monster. We have all the stuff we would expect from a horror book. But we have new things that are in it as well. And I think that's what makes it unique. You could say the same thing about almost anything, something by Stephen King. One of the reasons Stephen King, I think, works in horror is that because he pants writes, we really don't know what the conclusion is. We really don't know who's going to survive and why. Like, someone could actually die in a Stephen King novel, which does lead to a lot of surprise and suspense, especially if we know Stephen King's writing like beforehand. We know not to expect things to occur a certain way. Things might occur in a totally weird way, and that can actually create a lot of disappointment as well. One of the things I think about with Stephen King is the Dark Tower series. So I'm a fan of the Dark Tower series, and it's weird for me to say that because I'm hypercritical of it in a lot of ways. But I like it, and I like it because it's really imaginative. It's very bizarro with the first book. The first book is called The Gunslinger. It's one of my favorite books. It's so weird and just so on point, so interesting, and the characters really pop off the page. The seventh book has an incredibly unsatisfying ending to most people because the ending wraps up in a way, not just in a way you didn't expect, but in a way that doesn't seem to make sense given the setup. When you set something up in a book, you're kind of making a promise to the audience that you're going to see something, you're going to see this resolve, right? Your expectation that there will be an exciting conclusion to this, I'm going to fulfill that. Every story kind of makes that promise. I'm going to fulfill, you have an expectation that this conflict will resolve. We're going to fulfill that. And, the book's been out for a while, so I don't care about spoilers, but you have the first book opens with the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. So for 7 books, we have this expectation that Roland is going to have some sort of meeting again with the man in black. He's still pursuing him. That there is going to be some final showdown. And it never happens. The man in black gets killed by like a spider mutant boy that's a weird offspring of a ghost in Roland. It's very weird. But like, it's an anticlimactic moment. And it's like, we don't expect everything to go Roland's way. We don't expect, we expect there to be some kind of meeting between him and the man in black. But what we really don't expect is there to be just a random death scene. Like it seems to underserve the character. We don't dwell on it. He just gets killed and that's the end of it. We move on. So when we have an expectation of like, this character is really important, therefore shouldn't his death be important? And it just gets kind of brushed by. It feels bad, right? And not only can it feel bad, but the audience can get upset about it. Does the audience have a right to be upset about it? I mean, I would say yes, though it is the author's work. And Like, let's be honest, would you have found everything just as compelling if there was a regular climax, like a showdown between them? I think you would have, because the execution up to that point kept you guessing and kept it interesting. So genre expectations come down to what are the things in the genre that the reader wants to see, and you're going to put them in that book. So if it is science fiction, let's say space opera. Let's be a little more specific. Space opera. Space opera stuff like Flash Gordon or Star Wars. We expect spaceships. We expect some kind of big conflict, where like maybe the universe is at stake or something like that. We expect maybe romance. We expect a lot of action, those sorts of things, for us to call it space opera. If we pick up a book and it's in the space opera section and it's got long explanations of scientific details related to like the way spaceships travel, it's not meeting the genre expectation, the expectations of the genre audience. It's in the wrong genre, right? Or it's too far from the genre for a reader of that genre to feel like their time isn't being wasted. They might be upset with it. However, if you put those details in correctly and with all of the other elements that you would expect in a space opera also there, like they could function, not only function, but the audience could really like them because it's something a little bit different from what they normally see. So writing genre fiction is always that balancing act between putting the things in the book and having the book go the way that all the other books in the genre go. In other words, being generic and doing something new and original that will keep the audience guessing. It's the same thing with music, right? You can pick up a death metal record, and if it sounds exactly like a Cannibal Corpse record from the 90s, you might get bored with it, even if you're a death metal fan. In fact, especially if you're a death metal fan. Whereas if you hear something that has the core of like 1990s Cannibal Corpse or like Carcass or something, and then there's something really different. Oh, all of a sudden there's this clean section that goes on and there's acoustic guitars in the middle of it. Boom, all of a sudden we focus in on that and we're like, boo, this really like really surprised me, and there was something interesting in it. Now it didn't have nothing but acoustic guitars. It had some acoustic guitars. It's kind of like the Voice of the Soul song from Sound of Perseverance by Death. The placement of that song really keeps that whole album alive and interesting and original because it's not something we typically hear on a death metal album. So having those little elements, another band, giving death metal as an example, called Rivers of Neil. They had like saxophone on their third album, right? Eson's album After had all saxophone and other weird instruments on it, 8-string guitar, really strange stuff compared to what we expect. There's still black metal in it. There's still like extreme metal elements, but those are juxtaposed with things that are not typically found on a record like that, and it makes the record so much more memorable. And it's the same thing with genre fiction. I like to make allusions to music, not just because I understand music and I'm a musician, but also because I think it makes the connections a little bit clearer and easier to understand, right? If you show up to a blues concert and the blues player just plays the same thing, like, but just 12-bar blues for 2 hours, you might just get really bored, especially if the tempo doesn't vary. You have to do new or interesting things even within the framework of something like the blues. So genre expectations, when you're writing to a genre, it's all about knowing what the audience wants. Now, the hard part about audience expectations when it comes to anything, really, like things like genre, is that you have to do a little bit of mind reading. You have to guess what the audience wants. And what the audience says they want is not the entirety of what they want. Even if they are writing a review like, I expect this, I want this in this kind of story. Take that and receive that. They want that, but they also still want novelty. Novelty is like really essential when you are dealing with genre fiction or anything else. So you have to do a little bit of mind reading. You have to do a little bit of guessing for what that audience might want to see, especially if you're thinking in the context of like where you are in the development of the genre or something like that. If I use science fiction as an example, the big publishers have published, I don't know, let's say less than popular sci-fi books that are romances in space. If you could publish a book that is more like 1980s science fiction. Even though it's like big men with screwdrivers, there's an audience that probably really wants that. They want to return to form. They want to read something that isn't like the things that are around it, but it's like something in the past, right? But if you give somebody Flash Gordon and market it as modern sci-fi, they may not like it because the modern audience just doesn't expect stories like Flash Gordon. It's just not what they expect at all. So they won't like it. Like, oh, this is like, this is cheesy trash, like Star Wars ripoff. Not realizing that Star Wars is, of course, derivative of Flash Gordon and Star Trek. The last thing. So we talked about story expectations in general. Talked about genre. Here's number 3. Okay, number 3 is the expectations that come with attached to an artist or attached to like a franchise. They're more specific than genre. They're attached to something like a series or a universe like BattleTech, an IP, or a movie franchise like Terminator or Star Wars or something like that. Those expectations are a little bit different. While they can have genre expectations, they tend to be more specific because you've established a pattern. And the audience expects for you to maintain that pattern while still also somehow surprising them. This is why I think, if anyone were to make, I don't know, we'll look at Star Wars, right? Because I know lots of people have watched all the Star Wars movies. It's like one of the biggest franchises ever. I think it's number 2 behind Pokemon. Think about that for a minute, guys. Pokemon is bigger than Star Wars. Lots of people didn't like the prequels. A lot of Gen X people my age and older especially, didn't like the prequels. They thought they were garbage. That includes me, right? I didn't really like them when they came out. They didn't meet my expectations. What I expected was to feel the same way I felt about the old movies about the new movies. I expected The Phantom Menace to make me feel the way Star Wars did when I was 8. Of course, I was older at that point. I was a teenager. I was never going to feel the way Star Wars made me feel when I was 8 years old. That's impossible because I'm not 8 years old anymore. So we have a whole group a whole generation of people that are like, I don't like the prequels because they don't make me feel the same way and it didn't meet my expectations. So what do? They go and they make movies that they think are fulfilling the expectations of the audience, and they're garbage, right? The sequel trilogy. The first of the sequel trilogy, Force Awakens, is such an imitation. It's such a manneristic copy of the original Star Wars that it's almost silly. It feels like a bad Star Wars dream. I think I've used that for at least a couple of the videos about Star Wars. It feels like a bad dream. And it feels like a bad dream because it's like a weird reflection or imitation, a ripoff of a thing rather than the thing itself. Nothing happens which is unexpected after like the first 5 minutes or so. I would say the movie starts off in a somewhat unexpected way and then just kind of falls into a story pattern where it just repeats the first movie until the end. And we just really don't get any surprises. Nothing happens that we don't expect. They don't fail to blow up the Death Star 3.0 super mega ultra version, right? It just doesn't meet our expectations for novelty, right? It may meet your expectations for Star Wars looks a certain way. Check. Star Wars has colors that look like this. Check. Like the OT didn't have actually the OT had a lot of colors, but people think of it as being kind of colorless because the first movie had desert and then spaceships and a little tiny bit of forest, but mostly desert and spaceships. Number 2 had so much color. Anyway, so that's what they repeated. It's like desert and spaceships. Maybe there's a little bit of a set in there. I don't think like the sets are terrible and they look like Star Wars sets. But why is it so disappointing? It's disappointing because it doesn't show us anything new, novel, or interesting. It just feels like a bad imitation of what we've already seen. And so we'd feel that way about a book that we picked up and it was about a bunch of little halflings trying to destroy a magic artifact. We'd be like, this is just a ripoff of Lord of the Rings. Boring. Next book, right? So genre and regular reader expectations are a little easier to play with than franchise expectations. Franchise expectations are hard because we have a built-in audience. They want to see what they've seen before, and they want it to be really close. In fact, it has to be really specifically close, and it's difficult sometimes to figure out what exactly the audience wants out of it. For the prequels, it was like, I think the audience wants the same storytelling ideas that I used in the first ones and my approach. That was probably what George Lucas was thinking. And for the sequel trilogies, like what people want to see is walkers and X-Wings and Death Stars. And that's what we're going to give the people. Now, in terms of the money, I can't really say that the sequel trilogy is a failure financially. It made money. People were going and seeing it. But was that because of leftover love from the original trilogy and the movies that followed? Or is that because of its own strength? That's the problem with franchises. I think it was because it's just Star Wars and people are going to go see Star Wars. And it did look like Star Wars, right? It had all the same aesthetics from the original trilogy. That's what we got, right? In fact, the most original of the three sequels was the last one, Rise of Skywalker. What's called Rise of the Skywalker, right? So Rise of Skywalker, because it just, it had lots of weird, wacky space opera stuff. I think it was unintentionally like Flash Gordon. I don't think Jar Jar Abrams meant to make it that way. It just kind of ended up that way, that it was really Flash Gordon-esque, especially in the last map. Very space opera-y, without really meaning to be or knowing why. It comes off even cheesy and silly and laughable at the end. But it's like the most original part of the sequel trilogy is that final act, that ridiculous final act from Rise of Skywalker. Like if they had made 3 movies with that level of zaniness, maybe people wouldn't have liked them, but I probably would have enjoyed them more because it would have surprised me more. It would have bored me less, and it probably would have had a more satisfying conclusion overall. So yeah, franchise expectations are really hard to meet. This is another reason why I think something like Wheel of Time is bound to have bad books in the middle, because it's like you can't win in every direction when it comes to like franchise development. If you give people more of the same, they're bored. And if you give people surprises, they get annoyed because you're doing something different. The longer a series goes on, the harder it is to manage those audience expectations in a way that's going to deliver something good. I think of like the Bond, think of all the different eras for Bond and how those worked. The GoldenEye era, the Pierce Brosnan era. I actually think that's some of the best Bond that you're going to see. It's blockbuster Bond, crazy over the top action Bond. It's a lot of fun to watch. We kind of reset it with Casino Royale, and then every movie after that has to be like serious Bond. We're serious James Bond movies, right? They kind of reset the expectations there. But a lot of fans weren't happy with that. They're like, no, we like the Bond from the 60s that was crazy underwater, 60s and 70s with Roger Moore, like crazy underwater cars and stuff like that. That's what we wanted. We wanted stuff like Tomorrow Never Dies with like space lasers, just really crazy things. So, figuring out what the audience wants is actually pretty tough, and it gets tougher the tighter and tighter you draw a circle around it. Like the closer you get to franchise level, the harder it is to manage those expectations. Especially in a way that's going to satisfy the audience. Like Mass Effect 3. Was it possible to satisfy the audience with Mass Effect 3? I mean, I believe it's possible. But at the same time, it's so hard to manage the expectations and do a good job with it. Do you know what I mean? If they had phoned it in, more than they did, people would have been really upset. Dragon Age 2 had a lot of cool story elements, but all the other parts of it were like really phoned in. And it felt that way. It felt like you're just copying what you did in the first game, but it's worse and cringier and stupider because it's not original and not authentic and not really written all that well. You pick up on stuff like that. So anyway, audience expectations, 3 different levels, right? Like just general story writing. It's all about establishing a desired outcome and playing with how you get to that desired outcome or fail to get to that desired outcome. for genre expectations. It's the tropes, it's the type of story, it's the settings that are associated with the genre and what the readers of the genre want to see. How are you going to meet those expectations? By having a lot of the elements that are present in the genre. If it's a fantasy, maybe you have swords and dragons, right? But you have to do something original, otherwise it's boring. And then the last thing is the extreme difficulty of maintaining a franchise at a high quality. It also has to do with corporate IP death cycle. I don't want to forget about that. What tends to happen over time is like budgets get cut, writers disappear, creative teams change, and that's what ends up changing the franchise in a negative way, so that it no longer meets the audience's expectations because the people who first did it are no longer there. So anyway, let's take a look at the chat, and then we'll go from there. Thanks for joining me today. By the way, yes, I'll plug it again. Patreon.com/David V. Stewart. You'll get a free copy of everybody whenever you join. You have free access to, what is this? Keys to Prolific Creativity. My book on setting up your creative process so that you can get your projects done on time and under budget. And this month it will be Eyes in the Walls. Last month it is Water of Awakening. So if you do it if you time it correctly, you can get 2 books. So I'll leave Water of Awakening up there for most of November, I think, to just give people extra books. Then we'll do Eyes in the Walls, and that'll be, good time, fun stuff for that. Let's see here. In the postmodern subversive era, you don't expect the hero to win. Then you can play with that expectation and have him win. I'd say it really depends what you're doing. I think with some literary fiction, you actually expect things to just not have a correct outcome, a good outcome. Disney Star Wars actually did something right recently. I love Filoni stuff, wild and bold, great music. I'm not a big fan. I'm not a huge fan. I don't hate it either, though, so I'm kind of neutral on it. I think the best movies of the Disney era, the best movie is actually Solo. It's actually a really well-directed movie, but it came out in a time when certain groups of the fandom were just not willing to entertain the idea that there could be a good Star Wars movie, or that it, what was the audience expectations with Solo? That you'd have a movie about Han Solo and the actor would be exactly like Harrison Ford or be Harrison Ford. What you got was Ocean's 11 in space, which was pretty fun, to be honest, and was a really well-executed plot, good aesthetics, funny jokes for the most part, and it was a little bit too outside the universe, some of the jokes, especially the feminist robot, the jokes about how stupid she was. She was a joke. Right. People were upset about the feminist robot, but it's mostly like a joking on like the silly feminist robot. Like, but I don't know. I think certain parts of the audience were going to watch the movie no matter what, and we're expecting it to be bad, and we're looking for reasons to call it bad, even though it nailed every technical thing you'd want with a movie. Right. Ron Howard knows what he's doing. I read an 800-page book with no story, The Eye of the World. Eye of the World has a story. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, there's absolutely a story. They set it up. We're looking for the Dragon Reborn. Now you're being chased by monsters. Right? It's pretty basic setup. The Thin Red Line was originally a 1962 novel. The first movie adaptation was in 1964, but everyone remembers the 1998 Terrence Malick version. That's the one I'm thinking of, right? That's the one I'm thinking of, which is really very postmodern in its presentation. I haven't read the book, so I don't really know about that, but people remember the Woody Harrelson parts, and that's the part that's cool, and the other stuff is just what is this? So it's something that I don't think it's a bad movie. But it's not a movie when people think of war movies, they're thinking of John Wayne stuff. Or they're thinking of really out there stuff like Apocalypse Now, maybe. Really dark things. Thin Red Line is not those. It's just a different kind of movie. I read all the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books. Can't tell if there was any story really. Lots of jokes though. And it, if you're making jokes, if you keep the audience laughing, you don't need a really strong story. What's the story of Monty Python and the Holy Grail? Basic conflict. We're out to find the Holy Grail. Then it's a bunch of silly scenes. And then they get arrested because they're a bunch of LARPers in the forest. So no, you don't need a super strong plot depending on the genre, right? Like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, is that a bad movie? I think it's a great movie, but it doesn't have a plot. It's because it's all about how you make a comparison. There's no like good movie unit that you achieve by doing specific things. That would actually make it boring, believe it or not. That's my point, right? If you do everything by the book, it's going to be boring and you might as well not do it. You might as well have an AI write it, right? So you might as well have your AI write it. And this is probably why a lot of Hollywood movies are boring, is they use film writing manuals like Save the Cat to write the movie for them, and it kind of strips all the originality out of the movie, and they become completely predictable. And when they're completely predictable, not a lot of fun to watch. I'm just on a binge of all Star Wars since I got COVID, so I might just check out because why not? I'm not interested in really any of the series or any Disney Star Wars at all. I'm not going to talk about it at this point. I won't watch it. It's a waste of my time. Maybe I could get a couple views on YouTube by making another video about how angry I am that things suck. It's like, I can do that. Machiavellian me is like, yeah, you should do that. Like I should have done that with Rings of Power. Just been like, Rings of Power is bad. Buy my fantasy book instead. But I can't like dignify garbage with like a response, nor do I want to waste how many hours. Like how many, let's say every season's 12, just 12 episodes. That's 12 hours of my life. Maybe I could make a content, for each episode doing an analysis. But I think, especially if I don't enjoy it and I think it's like, creatively bankrupt, which is how I feel about virtually all Disney Star Wars, then it's going to be spiritually damaging to me. At a certain point, you have to say no. You have to say like, no more. I'm not going to play that game, right? I'm not going to be heels versus babyface and jump from one outrage thing to the next until I die, right? Of whatever, Oh, that was a fun sound. Hit my little boom there. I'm just not willing to be that person. I don't hate him for it, but what do I want to be, right? What do you want to be? Do you want to be an outrage marketer on Twitter? Let me rant about Star Wars for 2 hours with 3 other nerds. This episode is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends, which I honestly found myself enjoying, right? I don't want to do that, man. Like, I can just go drive a truck, right? If like my, and I talked about this with the robot stuff. If you depend on the robot to eat, the robot will command you to do ever more degrading and stupid things in order to get your meal. Sooner or later, it'll turn off the algorithm. What happened? I was so popular, and then YouTube turned off my traffic. Well, maybe the audience got bored. I better start complaining about Magic the Gathering now. All right. No one's listening to Magic the Gathering. What else can I complain about? Culture war. It's really important that I complain about this because we're having a culture war. It's like, yeah, complaining is step one, but then you have to do. And I've done a lot of doing, right? I've written a lot of books at this point. And what I want to do, and I was thinking about this the other day, it's like, what do you want to do with your time, right? It's like, man, I want to make music. I want to record albums, and I want to put out books, and I want to play video games and hang out with my kids. That's what I want to do. So stuff that is not that, I can do it the same way that, like, I don't want to drive a truck, but I would drive a truck to feed my family, of course, right? I don't want to go work in a warehouse, drive a forklift, but I'll drive a forklift in order to get money to feed my family, right? Is it something you do for a purpose, or is it something you do because you like it? And I can't believe that the people that are still like, that's their whole shtick, are really care. Like, I think they have to care more. It's like, it's a job. It's a thing you do to put food on the table. Well, there's a lot of more fun things I'd rather do than watch Star Wars series that I'm not interested in order to get some meager shekels. You know, I have to have a little bit of self-dignity, or I wouldn't survive, right? I'll do a little bit of it, right? You know, okay, maybe I can talk about this and get a few views and direct people towards what I really want to do, which is write books for them and make music that maybe people can chill out and listen to while they write. I thought that drink was a wizard pipe. I have a wizard pipe. I can go grab it. And I do smoke it. I did dress up for Halloween. Yeah, I was the green wizard. This was my hat, you know, which I just wear sometimes. I just wear this hat sometimes. It's a cool hat. My wife was the bride from Haunted Mansion in Disneyland. She had a really cool, her outfit was like way cooler than mine. I still need to work on mine. Like I have the hat, you know, the hat is cool. So I have a cool hat, you know, for sure. Cool hat. Very rad hat. I could put the pipe in the hat, by the way. Put the whole pipe like down in there, and then like when it's time to smoke, you get your pipe of tobacco out. And my wife like blew mine away. She looked so crazy. She had like black lights all in the dress, so it was all glowing. And then we got this heart off Amazon, this little like light up heart, and put red cellophane on it, and it was like pulsing, really creepy, really fun. Pokemon didn't betray their fans. It depends how much of a Pokemon fan you are, I guess. Prequels are not as good as the OT. That's the problem. In my opinion, it was because George Lucas didn't have any people saying no to his bad ideas. Well, he didn't have people saying no to his bad ideas for Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi. He had full creative control for that too. So I kind of leave that myth. That's just a myth. Oh, he's surrounded by yes men and no one was telling him no. Like he was working for corporate overlords is what made Star Wars good. He wasn't working for corporate overlords for any of those movies. You know, they're really indie movies, believe it or not. That's why he kept all the rights to them. He was the executive producer, meaning he was running the whole business apparatus. And he, you know, you can look a little bit deeper into what happened with Empire Strikes Back. It wasn't like, oh, it was good because George Lucas had to it went horribly over budget. He had to take over at the end to fix things. Like, yeah, he had creative control over those earlier movies too. The other thing is, I will say this. Now, this would be a controversial take perhaps. But I think in decades, maybe 100 years, when students are studying film, the prequels will get a lot more discussion than the OT. The OT will be discussed more as like an early work, and then people will look at the prequels because of the insane aesthetic value of it, as well as the unexpected twists of the story. And you have to think that in 100 years, people won't realize, they won't find the acting off. As weird as that sounds, right? Because people will talk and think and act differently in 50 or 100 years. So it won't be as obvious that people didn't like Hayden Christensen's acting at the time. Like that won't be as obvious to a critic in the future. They'll focus on more things like his delivery and they'll find it really effective. And it is effective in a lot of different places. And they'll focus on the story in general and especially the aesthetic values of the prequels. They will be talked about more, I think, than the sequels. But that's far in the future. That's my prediction. I don't know exactly how time will filter these things. You know, I don't know. But I think, you know, when Gen X dies off, no one will care about Star Wars 77. Very few people will care about Star Wars 77 at that point. It's like the Beatles. When your parents are dead, you know, when the boomers die off, who's going to still listen to the Beatles? People will still talk about the Beatles sometimes, but it won't be like, the Beatles are the most important and best band that ever lived. Won't be like that. You know, you got to think about how, talk to a younger millennial, like a 30-year-old. It's like, they like the prequels more. Why? They look better, they're cooler, and they like the story better, you know. I think people forget the limitations of the OT, but George Lucas was keenly aware of the limitations that he was working with at the time and was like really pushing the boundaries of special effects and did it again with the prequels. If you look at something like Revenge of the Sith. It's one of the best produced movies ever made. And it was made 20 years ago. The fact that nothing has looked as like aesthetically pleasing and as has had as good a production, and it's been made for far less money, right? You know, none of the Marvel movies are on the level of Revenge of the Sith in terms of its just artistic quality, visual artistic quality. Forget about the stories, because like most of the Marvel stories are like really predictable, save the cat kind of stuff. But yeah, the audience expectation was that they were going to get things that made them feel and look. It was going to look like the OT, and it was something different. If you look at it on its own terms, like the prequels have a lot going for them. I guess I'll forever be the one guy who liked Star Wars Phantom Menace when it came out and still enjoy it today. There's a lot to like about it. I know a lot of critics that loved it. Roger Ebert thought it was amazing. He thought it was so good he didn't even want to like compare it to other movies. He's like, this is so beyond the boundaries of what we normally see in movies that it's like I don't even want to give it a rating. Gave it 4 stars, but it's like 4 stars is like not, it's not adequate for what you see, because you're seeing something that's revolutionary. And that's true, man. Like it used so, like there was so much visually going on. And there was a lot going on in the story. Like I think the expositional dialogue and like the kid actor, those are the flaws that really stick out, that disrupt the flow of Phantom Menace. But there are so many, like the visuals are so good, for instance. It really is like a revolutionary film in terms of the visuals that are there. Star Wars is pretty much a dead IP to me, so whatever's happening in that sector doesn't draw my eye anymore. And it'll just slowly, they just milk it until it's dead. They'll never really be able to revitalize it, because that would require George Lucas. It would require vision. It would require risk. It would require the ability to defy audience expectations. Not, you know, it's like, oh, they subverted expectations. I don't know where that meme, maybe I started the meme, who knows, for like whatever the second one was. What was it? Last Jedi. You have to, but they didn't. They kept all the, like, they didn't do anything original visually or plot wise. They just kind of broke all their own rules and did random stupid things until the end. And we're going to surprise you at every turn. It's like, that doesn't make something on its own original, right? Doing things that are unexpected and aren't set up is not you know, good plot. That way. The prequel trilogy had good ideas with interesting visuals and a poor execution. I don't think you can say that. I don't think you can say the execution was poor. Like you say, everything about it was good, but it was executed poorly. What does that mean? Like they executed the visuals poorly? No, the visuals were executed perfectly. Oh, I didn't like some of the acting. Like, that's what it comes down to. It's like, I get people, I didn't like Jar Jar Binks. Okay, I get it. Why didn't you like Jar Jar Binks? Oh, he was annoying. I thought his voice sounded stupid. He was a slapstick character that I didn't like in that. It's like, okay. Kind of like complaining about just the execution of the acting, right? There's many execution things that go into a movie. And for whatever reason, that's what George wanted. He wanted Jar Jar Binks. He wanted, Jar Jar Binks fulfills the role of C-3PO. Right, he's a C-3PO character, but for whatever reason, C-3PO is kind of annoying, but he's much less annoying than Bisa Jar Jar Binks. You in big doo doo. You know, sequel trilogy destroyed all the legacy of the OT. Yeah, like how do you follow that up? Well, I expect there to be a continuation of story. Well, if you obliterate all the ability of the stories to exist, it's kind of hard to continue that. Better to reboot. That's why you get reboots, is like, well, all of our ability, like all of our framework for telling the stories in the franchise has disintegrated through 30 different creators being hired by the corporation to make it. So we need to reboot it so we can start at ground zero and then do the same thing again until it just completely like disintegrates. My feather's going the wrong way. There we go. What feather? OT always added new ships. The sequels went straight back to only X-Wings. The Last Jedi didn't even bother with Y-Wings. It had that dumb bombing run. Oh, it's so stupid. Yeah. Prequels are great in what George had promised since the late 70s. They were always going to be more stilted, costume drama style epics. It's what he wanted to do. It's more like Flash Gordon. And it's like Flash Gordon meets old Hollywood, to be honest. Like if you watch something like Ben-Hur's closer to the Star Wars prequels, I think. And that's why I think more people will talk about them in the decades. Like the focus will be on the prequels and not on the OT nearly as much. There's just the OT's rather like thin on set pieces too, because of the limitations of the time and everything that's going with it. You know, it's great. Like I don't want to take anything away from what he did with those original 3 movies. They're amazing, but they have much more obvious limitations than what you got later. I find the Timothy Dalton Bond movies very underrated, especially The Living Daylights. I think they are underrated as well. I think he was the one who did License to Kill, I think, which I enjoyed. But yeah, they don't get enough love. Timothy Dalton doesn't really get a lot of love. Sorry, I'm still going through the chat slowly. Clint Eastwood's been in some cool war movies. He has. Most people expect a war movie to be about heroes, like Saving Private Ryan. His channels are insufferable. Never watch them. Yeah, I can't watch that kind of content. I just am past it. Now, I used to watch Heels versus Babyface like when he did Warcraft content because I wasn't playing Warcraft. I'm like, oh, what's going on with Warcraft? Oh, more complaints. And he had a good way of articulating it because he played Warcraft, and so he knew what Warcraft players expected. And so it worked pretty well. Something like The Quartering, he started as a Complain About Magic the Gathering channel. And when he was sort of no longer able to do that, he just switched into complaining about everything else. It's okay. We have EFAT for watching the slop and pointing out writing problems. I could not stand that kind of content. I think you also, there's it's the problem of focusing on the details rather than the macro, like what's the context of the details and what do they do? Saying, I don't like this piece of dialogue may be like a meaningless gesture if you don't understand the context of why that's there or things like that. So it depends. It's not bad to focus on details per se, but to focus on them at the expense of structure and things like that, you're going to lose the big picture. Right. It's kind of like, the devil's the first lawyer and you're haggling over the laws all the time and you forget like what you're really talking about after a while. Raid Shadow Legends is hardly the worst game out there. I doubt it is. There's so many. I've never played Raid Shadow Legends, so it might be good, might be terrible. I haven't watched any of these film critics. I can only watch new movie bad so many times. I get it. Current movie is bad. Next movie will be bad too. I think I had a thing in the Afterglow collection, which I don't know where I have that. It's called New Thing, Old Thing. It's New Thing. It's not as good as Old Thing, right? That's just the way it ends up working, man. New Thing. It's not as good as Old Thing. We get too nostalgically attached to Old Thing, and then we watch the New Thing, which is supposed to be like the Old Thing, and then it's, of course, not as good. We need to find a new thing that's not like the Old Thing. That's a hard one. You have to take chances for that. You have to step outside your comfort zone and subject yourself to things that don't meet your expectations for a while to enjoy them, right? Like trying to listen to new kind of music. Like, I don't like jazz. Have you listened to jazz? No. Okay, well, sit down and try listening to a jazz record all the way through and see what you can get out of that experience. At the very least, you'll have an understanding of why you don't like jazz. And there's certain jazz that I don't like. There's a lot of jazz I do like, though. So, anyway. Az actually has other stuff going on, too. He's doing a whole self-improvement workout plan with weekly updates, etc. I'm talking about, what I see from him, which was... He complained about Warcraft till he quit, and everyone stopped watching him. So he went back to complaining about Warcraft. Hey, it happens. This is what happened, guys. And I don't hate him. I love him. I am saying these things out of love. I really want to emphasize that. This is not a complaint about him because he's bad, but it's just the nature of online content creation is that the robot selects you and trains you to do something. And then if you don't continue doing that, the robot takes away the money. I know it personally. But I refuse to keep doing what the robot wants me to do. I don't like working for robots. Az is, I'm sure, a very nice guy. I like his content, actually. I haven't watched it in forever, but I liked his content back in the day because he could actually say the things that people needed someone to say about World of Warcraft that had an audience. You know, people say that about Star Wars. I needed somebody else to say the things that I felt about Star Wars. It's like, yeah, that's what the audience needed, right? You needed someone who played World of Warcraft and knew what it was, not a channel that builds its entire existence on promoting World of Warcraft. Because, hey, we got to think about a conflict of interest with Bellular, for instance, while we're on World of Warcraft. Bellular can't survive World of Warcraft being bad. What's the other one? What's the other guy? He's kind of he's a portly Brit. Oh, come to me in a minute. He plays a warrior, big time raider. You know, you're not going to survive. Like they desperately wanted to quit WoW. Is what who am I thinking of? You guys know. I'm gonna jump down to the chat. It wasn't Bellular. Who am I thinking of? He used to do the Drama Friday, which was pretty funny. Anyway, I think he really wanted to quit WoW for a long time. But when your livelihood is WoW, how do you quit? You know, and if you're Bellular, how can you, like, you can't just say Warcraft sucks, guys. Please move on. His whole channel is World of Warcraft. He can't move on. Very few people can do what Total Biscuit did, and go, okay, Warcraft is not for me. I will talk about other things and let the chips fall where they will. And people followed him. Right. And people complained about that pattern. They're like, oh, it's another creator who got big with World of Warcraft and then quit. It's like, at a certain point, if the game isn't good, like, you have to be willing to walk away from it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's tough, but you got to do it. Same thing with culture, man. Like, at a certain point, you have to stop complaining and start doing. And there's a balancing act. I talk about this actually in the book, right? Like how to leverage negative emotions to gain attention. It's kind of like 5 to 1. It takes 5 positive interactions to offset 1 negative interaction. Your content ratio should be somewhere around there, like 5 positive things and 1 negative thing. The negative thing will get all the attention, but it will pull people into the positive things, which is where you develop your relationships with them. So where you find your real audience. Oh, here's a person who's really interested in what I have, what I'm doing creatively. Maybe I can get them to view it. Yeah. So content, making content is the best way to market. It's the cheapest and most effective way to market. But if all you do is focus on the negative and don't do anything for that, it's like these guys do nothing but they complain and then sell t-shirts or whatever, right? You know, or they do what EVS did and like every couple of years come out with a comic book and somehow leverage that, right? No, I got to spend my time doing what really matters, which is being creative. That's kind of how it is. And then I can do content to get some eyes on it. It's all good. Yeah, anyway, I like Heels versus Babyface. But when he tried to do something different with his life, everybody stopped watching him, which it's really hard to stick to that and be like, oh, everyone stopped watching me. My hope that I could do something that I liked to do and cared about and could be positive in my life has been dashed on the rocks. I have to go back to doing Warcraft content. That really sucks. You know, it sucks. The Holy Hand Grenade. Oh, Hardwick Bento. I liked Solo at first, but the more I thought about it, the more problems there are. A lot of the story falls apart when you think about it. I think it all works. Oh, I recently watched The Blob. All but one of the clean-cut characters who were set up to be romantic leads died in the first half. Then the rebellious punk became the lead. It's kind of like Night of the Living Dead, like everybody dies at the end. And that's kind of a cool ending. I find that Timothy... Yeah, okay, we saw that. I think the Final Fantasy franchise had a clever solution to this problem. They experimented with every game rather than trying to make each one some kind of sequel. I agree. There's many controversies about that. Final Fantasy 16. We can have a debate, and I don't think the people who say this are wrong, that Final Fantasy 16 should not have the word Final Fantasy. It should not be called Final Fantasy 16. I think Final Fantasy 16 is a really good game. I think it has a great story, great aesthetics, fun gameplay, really fun gameplay. Is it Final Fantasy, though? Because it's so divergent from the gameplay forms that have come before it, even with Final Fantasy 13 and 15 and 14 even, It's interesting. But I like that approach a lot better as well. And I kind of do that with my novels. So Water of Awakening is really an adventure novel focusing just on this character, Helga Ravenfriend, as she becomes called, right? And Needle Ash is the sequel, but it's different protagonists in a different country. And the third book, King Leper, is different protagonists again, with some of the characters coming back. So the sequels aren't like, I don't want to have like a 13-book Wheel of Time series where we get bogged down in all the different little plots from all the different characters. Every book is a complete book, complete plot, new ideas, new characters. I really like that idea. So for that series, that's how it is. For Moonsong, it's more traditional. Same characters in every book all the way to the end. So the first trilogy of Moonsong is done, and then I'm going to do a second trilogy, I don't know, here at some point. I've been behind on a lot of projects, but that's how it is. Solo, really? I would have gone with Rogue One. I think Rogue One might be the worst. Self-contained, mostly new characters who die, so I don't have to hear about them again. Pretty nice final battle. That's an interesting way of putting it, but Rogue One had a really bad premise. It didn't have a good plot. The plot was helter-skelter. It didn't fit in with the expectations of the franchise, right? Like, why would you undo some of the importance of what the first movie did, right? It felt like just felt like a fan film trying to fill in some gaps. And it's also made worse by studio interference. About 40% of the movie was reshot. They took it away from the director and they added all that crap with Darth Vader. And all of it's so cringy. It's just like fan service cringe. I hate it. So like most of the things in Solo, I think the entire movie, like its existence or non-existence, doesn't add to Star Wars at all and only subtracts from it. It's the most boring of any of the Star Wars movies. Its pacing is awful. And the reason the pacing is awful is that we have no idea what any of the events are. There's not a whole lot of story tension. We don't really kick into any kind of conflict until the last third of the movie, where we have to do something about this thing, right? So it's such a weird movie. I get why people like it. It's because it's just more of the same, but better, but maybe like not as insulting, I guess, as Force Awakens, not as stupid as Force Awakens, but in a lot of other ways, it's just technically worse than Force Awakens. Force Awakens had more original things and was more interesting, I guess. All the characters really fell flat in Rogue One. I would be really interested to see a director's cut because I bet you the characters are better. Half the things that you saw in the previews didn't go into the final movie. They were cut by the studio. So I don't know. I feel like there's a hidden story there that needs to be told about how this movie was ruined by Disney. But no one would think it was ruined because the fans all liked it. It met the fans' expectations. It didn't meet my expectations as a person who likes movies, though. You know what I mean? I watched it with my wife and she's like, that was the most boring. I can't believe how bored I was. I was like, yeah, this was so boring. Such a boring movie to watch. Wow. Basic conflict. There's a rabbit. The Holy Hand Grenade. Where was I? Sometimes reinventing a franchise works. Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle works because it's nothing like the original. It's instead a clever parody of video game tropes. See, I haven't really watched it, so I can't really comment. Did you dress up as your stoned wizard? I did. I have pictures on Twitter. I think there is no true Star Wars fan that liked The Last Jedi. I like it. I like it in a weird way. I like it from the perspective of it's an anti-fan movie. I only like it on a meta level. It's so hard to explain. You know, how do I like something that's bad and insults me? I like how bizarre it is and how disjointed it is. it's like a simulation of a Star Wars themed dream. Like if you go to sleep at night and you have a dream, and for whatever reason it's about Star Wars because you've watched Star Wars. If you ever had a dream about a movie, it's like a dream about a movie, but you're watching it on a screen. So it's more like cosent, or I don't know have the right word, but it's more like present. It's more real and bizarre. So I like it as a like in a meta post modern sense. As a movie, I think it fails at what it's trying to do, and I think it's like a bad Star Wars movie, and it's very insulting, right, to fans and to everyone who likes Star Wars. And I don't think it's well done. I think it's poorly written, and people nitpick a lot of the fight, fight where you have people waving their lightsabers around pointlessly, like a bad kung fu movie, and that's really what it is. But I mean, I don't worry about those details. It's like what happened was they're like, what if we did something really surprising? We just killed Snoke. And it's like, all right, let's do that. And he did it. And it's like, what do we do next? They attack them and they'll fight. And so, then we'll have a big lightsaber battle in the middle of the movie instead of the end. Like, okay, what happens after that? It's I liked when Snoke died because it was like, he was a dumb character. I'm glad they killed him. I'm like, but now they don't. Now the whole everything is upside down. It's like, why would they follow this other guy? There's no clear idea how like the hierarchy works in First Order or whatever. It's really interesting. It's just like Rian Johnson. It's like, I'm just gonna do things that are unexpected. That's what's gonna make it good. And I think it worked on a lot of normies. I think a lot of normies, like when I looked at Facebook, were like, wow, that blew me away. It's like, it blew me away with its badness, but like, what do you mean it blew you away? It was so surprising. Like they just didn't know how to feel afterwards because it defied their expectations in a way that they'd never seen a movie do before. And so when you stop and think about it, you're like, all of these were really stupid decisions. Like every story decision was really dumb and was like designed to like, every single scene was like, what could we do in this scene to show how much I'm not going to cuss, how much I hate Star Wars. That's why I called it a hate letter to Star Wars. Let's do every scene. Talk about how much I hate you for watching this movie. And so on a meta level, I kind of like that. It's like, man, it's like just a movie about how it's like on the meta level, it's a Star Wars movie about how bad Star Wars is. Made by a guy who wanted to tell Star Wars fans that they're stupid for liking things. And he did it through a bad narrative that makes no sense. That's The Last Jedi. The actors do point out bad dialogue, so Shenanigans has a point. Like, Harrison Ford actually would force George Lucas to rewrite dialogue. He'd be like, this is bad dialogue. And so they would redo the dialogue. So a lot of the better dialogue in the OT that's spoken by Harrison Ford is probably the result of Harrison Ford, like going, George, this is bad. The critical drinker stays semi-positive by counterbalancing his negative reviews with frequent videos called Drinkers Extra Shots, recommending good movies. Yeah, you need to do that, actually. Like, it's something that you need to do for that. The history revisionism on trying to discredit Lucas from his own work is weird. People run with the editing saved the original movie despite never seeing the unedited version. Yeah, it doesn't exist. Oh, George's wife went in and edited the movie and turned it into something good. George worked on editing that movie a long time to get it to where he was happy with it. It's not that he did it alone or had no help with the movie, right? But it's his vision. And it's surprising, if you go back and read the original drafts of Star Wars, which we should all do, it's surprising how close that OT, how it contains all the moments he envisioned in that original version, including like the Ewoks attacking the Empire. Such a weird thing to be like, oh, because they didn't like the prequels, they're like, well, the OT must have been good because George Lucas was working for a faceless corporation that destroyed his creativity. The corporation good. What a weird conclusion that Gen X came to and Gen Y came to. Corporation good. Yay, corporate overlordship of my franchise. And then they got what they wanted with Disney. And then like, it was bad. It wasn't bad. Like, I think a lot of people liked the sequel trilogy, but they like every freaking thing that comes out. My usual like pulse on the normies is like my normie Facebook friends that don't, they just watch movies for fun, and my wife, who's a normie. God bless her. But if my wife doesn't like something, then I know that like normies are not going to like it. And my wife did not like the new Star Wars movies. She watched a couple of them with me, and I was just like, these are boring and stupid, Like, oh yeah, I get it. I'll probably watch the sequels with my son here at some point. Just be like, hey, these are pretty bad. You want to watch them and tell me what you like about them? I'd love to see like, in fact, I won't even tell him they're bad. I've never told him that they're bad. I've just told him like I don't really care for them. They're not made by George Lucas, We want to watch the Star Wars movies that George Lucas didn't make, and you can tell me what you think about them. I would love to actually do that. I think that would be some really interesting content, because I think it would challenge some of my thoughts about, how people interpret good or bad, Yeah, it might be bad in the context of Star Wars, but for my son who doesn't take Star Wars seriously, none of that stuff probably matters at all. He's 8. He probably doesn't care. And if I was 8 and I watched the sequels, I'd probably think they were cool. I probably wouldn't be all upset about them. I think it's sort of the nostalgia enshrinement of the things we liked when we were children. This is the affliction of Gen Y. Let me get my book, man, because I want to talk about Gen Y a bit while I'm on this tangent. Where the hell is that book? All right. Gen Y. I'll tell you why Star Wars was so upsetting, both the prequels and the sequels for Gen Y, my generation. And I guess Gen X as well to an extent, but like, especially guys who are like 40. All right. So if you don't have this book, you should get it. It's called Afterglow, Generation Y. It's my literary fiction book. It's a collection of short stories and aphorisms and all kinds of things having to do with the afflictions and the problems of my generation, their bad attitudes, their failures. People think I'm hard on baby boomers. I'm like, no one's as hard on my generation. Like, baby boomers hate their children. They hate my generation. I'm harder on them, I think, than baby boomers because I understand them, because I am one. So I like really hold up the mirror and be like, this is the bad part. This is what we did wrong, right? Baby boomers just hate anyone that's not them. Like, they hated their parents and they hate their children. I don't know why, but they do. I have some ideas why. But anyway, Y Signal by J.D. Kelman. I'll just plug J.D.'s book, right? It's a cool book. I like this pink cover. It just looks cool. I didn't know. I'm in another one with JD and Brian Niemeyer called Generation Y, the New Lost Generation, that has a bunch of essays. This is all fiction stuff. Okay. But anyway, this book. Old thing, new thing. I have a lot of things in here that's about this. The problem with my generation is that growing up, we were materially wealthy, spiritually poor. And that has produced some weird psychological effects in us. That's why we're so neurotic. That's why we rage about Star Wars, which shouldn't matter at all, right? It's why people care about World of Warcraft. It's me, it's everyone that's like me, right? Materially wealthy, spiritually poor. What does that mean? Well, a lot of us, I was Protestant. My parents didn't divorce. A lot of us had divorced parents, which is going to disrupt your spiritual life tremendously. You don't have to be like a Catholic to understand the importance of that. It disrupts going to church on a practical level, right? When you're a Protestant, going to church becomes this kind of paper thin thing where it's not about ritual and like deep belief, but about reading the Bible and singing praise music. Nothing particularly wrong with that. But once you step over the Protestant line and like go to a Latin mass or go to like a Orthodox liturgy or an Eastern Catholic liturgy, and you get an idea like, oh, I've never experienced religion. I didn't know what religion was. I grew up going to church and I didn't know what religion was. I had a spiritually deprived existence. So we were spiritually poor. So a lot of us, they were the first generation to not go to church. Their parents went to church. Like everyone in my grandparents' generation went to church. The baby boomers took their opportunity with the slight decline to like just kind of stop going to church to a lot of extent. Stop making their kids go, being less involved in church life. And so, yeah, we had a spiritually deprived existence. And so you replace that with inappropriate things. You replace religion with inappropriate attachments. You replace the disruption of your family life with inappropriate attachments. You replace your parents are not present in your life and you're at daycare and school all day. You replace what's missing, which is attachment to parents and siblings, with inappropriate things. And for my generation, that was entertainment. That's why people care about Ghostbusters. You notice the only shit people care about is crap from the 80s because we were kids in the 80s. So that's why. You don't see millennials throwing a fit over Captain Planet or some bullshit from the 90s. They just don't. Why? Because they lived a different childhood, right? That's a big difference between Gen Y and millennials. If you were a kid in the 90s and 2000s, you didn't have this crossover where like you had a really spiritually deprived, materially wealthy thing where you wanted that replacement. I think millennials replace it with politics probably more, but for whatever reason, Gen Y got attachment to things, toys, Star Wars. Why Star Wars? Why is Star Wars such a thing for my generation? And the answer is Star Wars is a spiritual movie. It's very spiritual. It has a deep spiritual message. And it's a Christian message in a lot of ways, right? Now, first of all, there's a deep spiritual message with this duality thing. It's not Christian, but we don't have like a Manichaean view, but it's more inspired by Manichaeism, which is like dark side, light side, eternal conflict, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, you have a conflict between good and evil. The force, God is working towards good. Your faith produces outcomes. The magic of the force is a divine force. You have the salvation of the Father by the Son, through his sacrifice, that bad people can turn back to good, that people can be saved. These are all deep spiritual messages. So of course my generation got really attached to the deep spiritual messages there. It's not appropriate in a lot of cases. They should be able to let it go. You should be able to like new things. You get focused on Star Wars because that's what you look to have that meaning, that feeling that most people would actually associate with religion. It's interesting. So anyway, you can find out a lot more about it in this book, right? Afterglow Generation Y. I articulate it through a lot of different stories why my generation became so inappropriately attached to the wrong things. Hardwick Bento says, I'm a millennial and watched all 6 Star Wars movies for the first time in the same year when I was around 15 or so. I liked the OT a lot, but found the prequels boring and too CGI heavy. That's fine. I know a lot of people that are millennials and they like the prequels way more. Prequels have the best lightsaber choreography. I think so too. Rian Johnson started the Subvert Expectations meme, one of the most overrated directors. I never really got into Star Wars movies when I was younger. I actually loved The Force Awakens a lot. My favorite, though, are the video games, especially KOTOR. I like the first KOTOR game a lot. I didn't like KOTOR 2, but I feel like I need to replay it because so many people like it. I like the first KOTOR a lot. But KOTOR 2 was like broken when it came out, so that's what I remember. Is like it had missing content. It was broken. It didn't work right. The story was all over the place. The blocking of the prequels was terrible. No, it objectively wasn't. If you're talking about where the actors are placed in the scene, it's very dramatically appropriate. It's actually really good. Um, but I have stage experience, so maybe I'm comparing it to the stage. Marcia Lucas was in a documentary last year. She took credit for nearly everything, including Obi-Wan's death and May the Force be with you. What? That's great. I got to check this out. I'm generally hesitant to trust the word of an ex, especially when there's something to be gained from trashing your ex. Totally. She made George out to be a bumbling idiot, claiming he had to read a book on set to figure out how to direct. Anthony Daniels was also in the documentary to echo her claims. That's great. YouTuber fact-checked Marcia Lucas's claims and tore them apart. It seems that both she and Anthony Daniels hold grudges against George. Of course. Is there anything sadder than being like, oh, my ex-husband made so much money after I divorced him? How can I ruin him? Like, it, I'm going to log my WoW now, but I'm still listening. Cool. I know a lot of people listen on the other monitor playing WoW or something else. I'm going to log my... Okay. Star Wars created a whole new world that imploded after Disney removed the EU and didn't try to adapt it with the original actors when they had the chance. Yeah. I don't know. The EU was always... So the EU was always kind of a milking product. I don't hate the EU or anything, but the EU was like, okay, people want more Star Wars. What's a fairly cheap product we can give to the mega fans on that long tail? And that was going to be the EU books and, video games and things like that. So I've talked about this like long tail. There's like the if you think of a graph, like everyone, let me do it so it makes sense on your screen. Like, where would it go? Start here. Okay. Start on this side and get lower. So yeah, everybody over here watches the movies. 100 million people watch the movie. How many of those 100 million people buy the toys? Well, people who really love the movies, they buy the toys. So as you get fewer people buying the product, the value of the product goes up. The profit margin on the toys is way higher than a movie ticket. People who become super fans, you want to have a lot of crap for them to buy. However, it needs to be things that you can have a high profit margin on and are cheap to make. And that's novels. Novels are really cheap to make. Comics can be, but there's a lot of Star Wars comics, and there was in the 90s at least, but those novels, because like writers will work for peanuts, man. They'll work for like nothing and be happy about it. It's like you can write this book for $2,500. Oh, cool. $2,500 is nothing, guys. That's nothing compared to like the cost of developing a toy. And yeah, you don't need to sell that many copies. You can get to the black real quick selling novels. And those voracious book readers that love Star Wars, man, I knew guys that have read every Star Wars book, and I've only read like 4 of them. They're fine. Like, I didn't like hate them or anything. I thought they were good actually. But there was plenty that I looked at. I'm like, I don't want to read this story about like, there was one with like, Leia was going to have to marry some other guy for like a peace treaty. I was like, I don't want to read that story. I like thinking of Han and Leia the way that I already think about them. I don't want more story in that direction. But it's a good conflict when I stop and think about it. We'll disrupt this and go like that. If George really did read a book on set to learn how to direct, doesn't that make him seem more impressive? He had to read a book on set to learn how to direct, and then he made the most successful movie franchise of all time doing that? Wow. Pretty impressive, isn't it? Mitch says, finished Needle Ash and loved it. I just one question. Why did Julia do what she did? Well, why did she go where she was is because she had basically a dream to do it. She had a vision of what she was supposed to go when she was basically in the Fae. So that's why she was on her quest, and she was just kind of going by feeling like, I'm just going to where God wants me to go. I'm going to walk by faith until God puts me to where I need to be, and then that's where I'll be. And so that's where she ended up. She ended up with Michael. So she was, if you look at the two sides, like Michael is the more cerebral, like planning guy. Like I have to figure out the solution and I have to, to solve the problem. And Julia is the person who walks by faith and works by feeling. She's the opposite of him. So what saves him? She saves him through her own feeling of that just has a purpose to fulfill and needs to do it and is hoping that she's doing it correctly. Like think of the person kind of walking blindly by faith. That's Julia. Which is why she, you figure out that she was actually, I don't remember how old. I have to look at. She's like 80 or 100 years old, right? It's like she didn't live for a full 100 years, but she was in the Feylands, like lost in time, directly interacting with God to figure out what her purpose was. So that's why she did what she did. I grew up with the OT first, being born in 1993, albeit special editions. Yeah, special editions are an interesting spot. There are some things I hate about the special editions, like that they changed the music in Jabba's palace, and it's so bad. It's such a bad sequence they inserted. I remember watching it in the theaters, and I was just like, and they had the CG guy like come up to the camera, roar, it's like, oh, they didn't do this. It's so like, I didn't have the word cringe there, but you're just like bugs crawling on your skin watching that scene. Like, what was he thinking? It's his movie. I guess he can do that. But boy, that was definitely one of those special edition moments. You're like, George, do you have a screw loose? Like, what are you thinking, man? It's not for kids enough. It's like, maybe he didn't like the original music, or it just didn't hit the vibe he wanted. So, but hearing this ultra produced, super crisp music in Jabba's palace just felt weird in terms of the sound as well. Like, it just was strange. The original, like, you heard this echo from the music. It felt ambient. It felt like it was part of the like background of what you were seeing, and more real and more present than like this. We're bringing it up into like full crisp album level volume, super crisp music. This is like something you would see in a musical or a light opera. Totally bizarre in Return of the Jedi to stick that in there. I don't know what he was thinking. I can guess what he was thinking. I want this to be better. I want this to be really bigger. And it's like, well, you got that. I don't think it's good, though. How much danger is there of not meeting audience expectations when writing in multiple genres, like space opera, gothic horror, and hard-boiled mystery under the same pen name? Oh, that's a great question. So, author style, right? I guess that's part of franchise. I mentioned authors. Your audience, if they like your style, is going to like other genres that you're in. I think you just have to know the genre that you're writing in good enough and just have your style shine through. And I think readers will be fine with it. If you're writing hard-boiled mystery, you want to have the things that make the hard-boiled mystery what it is. The reason you'd want to write it in the first place. I want a mystery plot. I want kind of a surprise here, and I want maybe this kind of relationship to be present. And then you play with how you get to those points. You do lots of surprises along the way. And what's great about mysteries is like you can, along the way, do really disruptive events. Like all of a sudden, a car runs their car off the road into a ravine and they escape. Whoa, that totally disrupted what was happening. And it's almost random, but then it's another mystery. Who did this? Why did they do it? How does this relate to this thing? Right? You can put in lots of little events like that are always going to be surprising when they happen and then we can contextualize them after the fact as part of resolving the mystery. So mysteries are great because you can have so many surprises in a mystery that will work for the format. It's why it's such a great format. That's why it works. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. You said Julia, not Sharona. I'm sorry. I'm crossing my characters. Yeah. So why did Julia do what she did? Well, she was always on her brother's side. So I was always on Michael's brother's side. I'm sorry. Yeah. So she was always on his side, right? Like conspiring with him. So she had always conspired with him to have all these things happen. And Michael just wasn't in on it. So that's why. Sorry, I switched those in my mind when you asked it. I'm like, well, yeah, Sharona has some interesting motivations. Yeah, Julia was just part of the conspiracy. She was part of so what she was doing, she was leading Michael to do the thing which Michael's brother wanted him to do, which was to kill the queen of Frala. So that's why she did it. She was always going to be queen. It was always in their plan. Sorry, I switched those in my mind just when you said it. Like the distance of time, it's like from when I wrote it, I'm like, oh, Julia, wait. Maybe he's talking about Sharona, right? They're two us. I shouldn't have done two us like that, but whatever. Sharona's a fun character. She's one of my favorites. She's actually in the next one. I'll come up with called King Leper. She has a part in that one. There's characters in the theatrical cut version of Jabba's palace, not in the special editions. Yeah, they replaced them with these other actors and like CG monsters, and like these little, like the aliens, instead of being animatronic and just kind of moving in that stilted way, they're CG and they move like really fluidly, and they're doing like this dance move. And I'm like, this production is like a bigger production than I would expect Jabba to have as like a chamber ensemble, I guess is my feeling. It just felt so weird and out of place. Now, fun fact. You guys like fun facts. If you can find the original theatrical cut on VHS, there is a boobie. There is a breast slip. There's a nipple slip in the Jabba's palace scene with the Twi'lek, one of the Twi'lek dancers. She's doing something, and then her breast comes out, and you can see it, and it goes back in. So if you slow motion that, unfortunately on VHS, the frame isn't always able to be focused in because of the way VHS video works, because it's an analog medium. But if you're watching on Laserdisc, you can find that frame, and it's, when you were 11, you're like, we found the boob in Star Wars. Guys, you want to see the boob in Star Wars? There's also a stormtrooper with, I think, white sneakers in the theatrical cut that they like digitally edited out, the sneakers. But I think it actually had to do with the transition from widescreen to like pan and scan. I think you end up with a little bit, because the film is like this, like they film it in, with one size film, and they project it into that aspect ratio. So there's actually stuff missing. So I think for pan and scan, you get a little bit on the top of the bottom, and they move around the frame a little bit to get that square, that 4:3 aspect ratio that you get on TVs of the olden days. So I think it might have been a result of that. Like it wasn't originally in the frame, but because it's in the VHS version, I don't know. I just don't know if it was ever in the movie theaters to be noticed, or if it was a part of the pan and scan, because you can see like little, like, I don't know, they're like white sneakers in the first movie. It's just one of those like little Easter eggs that fans picked up back in the 80s and 90s. It was funny when in Solo they had a singer and a fish in a glass doing the low voice. Felt like classic Star Wars. The music also felt inappropriate for a crime den. I agree. It's like a Broadway musical number in a crime den. I don't know. It's like, you know what we should do? We should make it like the opening scene of Temple of Doom. I'm like, I don't think you need to do that. It's like the opening scene of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was like, this is what I really wanted to do with Return of the Jedi. Let's put it in Indiana Jones, please. Come on, Steve. Let's put it in Indiana Jones. Isn't it funny? Solo is the only Disney Star Wars movie with a beautiful female character in it. It is funny. I'm trying to think. Like, I want to say Daisy Ridley's not bad looking, but I think she's just average. I don't think she's ugly or anything. I think she's just average. I'm trying to think I can't think of any other hot girls. There's Rose Tico, who's just really frumpy. Just like a frumpy 5. Daisy's a 7. Maybe an 8. I mean, for like, if you met her in real life and she looked like that, you'd probably be like, she's an 8. She's pretty good looking, maybe even higher. I don't know. I noticed the boob flash too. I'm glad yes, my brother's here. We paused that laser disc and looked at that boob. And you guys have to remember that, like, in the year of our Lord, 1990, you couldn't just go on the internet and look at boobs. The internet was like not a thing. There were message boards you could dial into with your analog modem, and things like that. But if you were a kid and you were like searching for boobs, this is so stupid. But like you would do that. You would find the boob in Star Wars, and you'd be like memorize the boob, or like figure out which VHSs had sex scenes and watch just that part while your parents weren't home, because your parents were never home. That's the other thing about my generation is like, weren't you being supervised? Nope. We were not supervised. We had a nicely unsupervised existence. It goes between two extremes, right? There's the Gen X experience, which is like, yeah, I walked myself home from kindergarten and made myself food because my parents weren't around. We had that, Gen Y had that, and then it kind of transitioned into like full daycare mode, where it's like, yeah, I got up my parents woke me up at 7, brought me to school. I got home at 9 o'clock at night after going to school, daycare, and soccer practice. No wonder millennials are so neurotic, man. You didn't have any time to just pause the Star Wars Laserdisc and look at the boob. My generation was like, my existence really was like, I was a latchkey kid, and then I was in daycare, and it was like I was in daycare until like 6 o'clock at night, and then I came home and my parents didn't really interact with me. Like I even I had to make my own meals starting at like the year, probably when I was in 8th grade. I made all my own meals from that point on. My parents never made me dinner. Like, I shouldn't say never, but like we didn't have family dinners. Everybody was getting home at different weird times. Like it was just helter skelter. So I had a little grill outside, and I'd grill myself a hamburger every night, or like a chicken sandwich. That's what I ate. And I skipped lunch. Like I was shredded in high school. I was like 8% body fat. Not probably that low. Let's say 10. I was skinny. I was skinny because I didn't eat anything all day. I pocketed my lunch money to buy heavy metal albums when my parents weren't looking. And then I came home and I cooked myself hamburgers on the grill because no one would feed me. But yeah, your parents weren't around, so yeah, we're going to look at this Star Wars boob. We're going to find my dad's copy of Terminator 2 and watch the outline of the boob from the sex scene. The boob. Boobs were hard to find. Like if you weren't grabbing them off VHS, this is so stupid to talk about. But here's what you do is you turn on the cable, if you had cable, and you turn on to HBO or whatever at night if your parents were asleep, because they only put on the porn at night. Now it'd be all scrambled because your parents weren't paying for HBO. That was money, that was a lot of money. For HBO was like, I don't remember how much it was. It was a lot of money. I want to Google it. Like, how much was HBO in the 90s? How much was HBO in the 90s? Oh, in 1990, it was $20 a month in the 90s. Yeah. So $20 a month, but you have to double that to like get a better sense. So like $40 a month. You're getting a deal with HBO Go, or what's it called now? It was HBO Go, then is HBO Max. Now it's just Max. Is that right? Is it just Max? So you're probably getting a deal with Max. But yeah, $20. Yeah, my parents were going to pay $20 for HBO. And looking back, I was thinking about it. It's like, if you could just get HBO, that would have been better than all the other TV put together. So yeah, you would turn that on late at night and it'd be all scrambled, like with these weird colors and stuff. And you couldn't see anything except occasionally, like there would be enough straightness that you could see like a boob moving, or like, some other body part that you weren't supposed to see when you were 12. And you're like, wow, I saw a butt or whatever, right? Like it was really hard to do that. There was no internet. Once you had the internet, like the first thing kids figured out how to do when we had the internet, and we weren't supervised, was to go look up pornography. So I think a lot a lot of people that are just a little bit younger than me have major struggles with pornography addiction because starting at a young age, they had unrestricted access to the internet and were able to look at pornography. And I think the type of pornography matters. I think if you had unrestricted access to the internet and you had high-speed internet in like the age 2, or like the year, let's say 2003, 2004, when like video pornography, like you could get unlimited amounts of that, I think it messed you up a lot more than my generation, where we had like zero access to porn. We were watching scrambled HBO stuff to try to get our rocks off or whatever. And then otherwise we had to steal porno mags from the 7-Eleven, which was a challenge, let me tell you. Or like if you knew someone that had one, everyone would train it around in school. I know this sounds really gross, maybe, by like today's very like private standards about this stuff, but it's like, dude, I heard you got a Club International. It's like, dude, I got one. I'll give it to you when I'm done with it, right? So bad. Such bad stuff. Yeah, really bad. Yeah, anyway, that was the thing, You can see some boob under the sea through the material in the green Twi'lek in Return of the Jedi. Under the see-through material. I think you could probably see it now, but you could see it actually come all the way out, but it's just for a frame. And, anyway. Daisy Ridley's perfectly fine, but the faces she pulls ruins it. Funnily enough, the actress who plays Rose is very pretty in real life. They intentionally uglified the actresses. Yeah, I did a video on that a couple years back. I was like, here's her like headshots. She doesn't look bad in the headshots. Why did they make her super frumpy? It's like, that was an intentional choice. They intentionally didn't put makeup on her, gave her a weird hairstyle, gave her like a frumpy outfit that made her look like she was fat, like all that kind of stuff. They did it all intentionally. Daisy Ridley can look better than she did in the sequel trilogy. They gave her an androgynous hairdo and put flaps of cloth behind her pants to hide that she's curvy from that angle. That's interesting. So they like desexified her, which is the opposite of what they did with Carrie Fisher, right? That first movie, they like sexified her. The second movie, she's more subdued. She's like more professional. The third movie, they're like, we're going to put her in a bikini. Yeah. Darth Kilhoun, thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate it. When creating writing, is it true if you write for everyone, you write for no one? Does art made for a particular audience tend to succeed more? I think there's a lot of truth to that statement. All of the big explosive movies or video games that you can think of didn't originate with a wide audience in mind. And that includes Star Wars, since we've been talking about Star Wars. Star Wars really started, George did not expect it to be super successful, neither did the studio. It was really for niche audiences. It didn't open across a ton of theaters, but it took off because it had universal appeal. So if you can write something that's for a niche audience and yet can have appeal beyond that, that's when you really hit it. Same thing with Twilight. Same thing with the Twilight fan fiction, 50 Shades of Grey. Same thing with Harry Potter. Same thing with probably Lord of the Rings, right? Tolkien's publisher did not expect Lord of the Rings to be as popular as it was, or they would have published maybe the Silmarillion or something else like that. There's so many examples of this. So yeah, you want to have an audience in mind who's going to like it and think about the things that they might like. But the universal storytelling strategies that you use, presenting something unique, making sure that it's original, it may be original enough that it can explode outside of that audience and have wider appeal. If you just try to say, I'm going to write a blockbuster movie, and it's just like an amalgam of like Die Hard, Jurassic Park, Terminator, and Star Wars. This sounds like a badass movie, but you probably wouldn't be able to pull that off if you just did, I'm going to just do an action movie. We have to do something that's like original that brings people to the table. Like Die Hard is about, terrorists taking over a building, right? It has some unique elements to the action movie formula. And that's why it was so popular and spawned a franchise. And actually every movie in the franchise up through like the fourth one did something a little bit different with that. Every single one delivered something new. I only say the fourth one because I don't remember. I think there was a Die Hard 5, but I don't remember it. So I don't know if I saw it or not. I may have not seen it. Or I may have seen it and forgot it because it wasn't good. That tends to happen. I notice with myself is like, have you seen this movie? It's like, I realized I watched this movie. It was a Will Ferrell movie with Zach Galifianakis in it called The Candidate, I think. I watched it twice and only realized halfway through the second watching, I watched this before. And I forgot about it because it was just boring and not very good. Gen Y had to figure out how to do a lot of stuff themselves. Anyway, yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Darth Killoon. It's probably a good idea to think about your audience in mind, but use good storytelling techniques and try to do something original within that framework. And the framework of a genre can be a really good guidepost for what you can do, right? Rather than like, I'm going to be completely original, or I'm going to write a blockbuster. I'm going to write a popular book. Why was Jurassic Park popular? It's a sci-fi novel. So the sci-fi ideas traveled out. Like, what's a sci-fi ideal that could appeal to a lot of people? Time dilation. Well, I figured out that's not true. Figured out no one cares about time dilation because I wrote that book. Dinosaurs. Why did no one do dinosaurs? Like, yeah, dude, it was great. It was a great idea. Well executed. Good sci-fi book, good sci-fi movie. Neurotronic always talks about how big a deal it was in 1981 that you could see through Karen Allen's dress on top of the submarine in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah, that was pushing boundaries back then. That's a good point. During an episode of Ripley's Believe It or Not, they did a segment about body painting with hot models. As a kid, I felt like I found the holy grail despite not having full nudity. Yeah, it's like it's not flesh colored, but you can see you see the nipple. You see something like that. In the Soviet Union, they would send one print of a film on a tour of many, many cities. Each projectionist would remove a few frames from a sex scene until at the theater at the end had no scene at all. What? That's wild. What a weird idea. So I guess it's because they can get like a frame of the boob to look at. They pulled it up to the light. Yeah. Until there's nothing left. What a funny idea. Carrie had to convince George to put her in that bikini, by the way. I didn't know that. Carrie Fisher in Return of the Jedi was her peak Coke body. Yeah, but the robe worked for her body shape also. She had lipstick on, etc. Daisy Ridley is average looking at best, even with good clothes and makeup. I feel like they made the other actresses purposefully frumpy so as not to take the spotlight from the homely female lead. I don't think she's bad looking. Like, I see other pictures of her. I think she's okay looking. I don't think she's like a bombshell though. And so, there's a debate here. Like, most men, you can show a picture of a pretty girl and they'll all agree, yeah, she's pretty. But where they're going to say she is, like how pretty she is, it's always going to vary. There's always like, where's your frame of reference? What are you comparing it to? Things like that. What's your personal taste? When they shot The Mummy in 1999, Rachel Weisz's nightgown went transparent from getting wet. They CGI'd it to be opaque again, but missed the shot. It's obvious on the 4K version. Hold on. Excuse me, I need to go buy something. Right? Anyway, so like that's something that I think about. Like, beauty is comparative. It's a quality, not a quantity. There's no beauty unit. Like, you can't. Daisy is 7 beauty units. No, I think she's 8 beauty units. I think she's 9 beauty units. Uh-oh. What are we comparing her to? Well, if we're comparing it to like someone with like ideal body proportions, for instance, you may see, oh, well, she's not as pretty as that person. We tend to make comparisons. It's a comparative idea. On some level, it's outside of us, and there's an ideal woman somewhere up there in that concept realm. Maybe we could access a little bit, but we can't access her well enough to be like, this person is definitely 9.8 on the beauty index. The next person goes, no, she's 8.9. She's a 7. She's a 7.5, whatever. Whatever you go with, right? Anyway, I'm looking at the time. I'm out of time, guys. It's been fun, though. Having lots of people debate, how pretty is Daisy Ridley? I doubt you'd find anyone they'd be like, she's a 5. She's below average, mediocre. No, it's like the debate on where she is between like 6 and 9. Or 6 and 8.5, right? Very few people will probably put her at 10. But that's, we expect like, bigger boobs and like a more, this fuller lips and this shaped face once we get above a certain amount, and like certain symmetries, things like that. So anyway, I think that's going to be it for today, guys. Afterglow, Generation Y. I'm actually kind of hard on my generation, but it's also a love letter to my generation. Like the hard things, the annoying things, the weird things about us, being like media, video game players, obsessed with the wrong things, bad attachments, not knowing how to form relationships, all that kind of stuff. The secret to subverting expectations properly is to promise regular steak and deliver filet mignon instead. If you deliver a stale Big Mac patty, they'll be disappointed. That's a good way to put it, yeah. Someone orders a steak, they expect a steak. You just do a really good steak, and they'll probably like it. Keys to Prolific Creativity. You get this if you join the Patreon, patreon.com/DavidVStewart. Check out J.D. Cowan's book. Give a little love to him, because I had it on hand. Eyes on the Walls will be free through Patreon and through the channel. I need to figure out like how to mail people for the channel membership all the book links, but I have them. So maybe I'll do like a subscriber only post or something that'll have links to all that, and I'll do that a couple times a month. So people will be able to get their books, which they pay for through the membership, get free access to them, as well as the audiobooks through YouTube. So anyway, guys, take it easy. Thanks for joining. Thank you for the stream. I always have fun. So that's it. Have a great one. I'll see you on the other side. I heard originally wanted Sean Connery to be Gandalf. I wish the ring had never come to me. So do all who live to see such times. That is not for them to decide. All we can do, we can only decide what to do with the time that's given to us. I don't remember the exact line. Just thinking of that. So do all who live to see such times, Frodo. Bilbo Baggins, do not take me for some conjurer of cheap tricks. I'm not trying to rob you. I'm trying to help you. I'll take the rapists for 200. Anyway, have a good one, guys, and I'll see you next time. Sean Connery's Gandalf would have been pretty funny. I think it would have been pretty epic. What's another good line? Shall not pass. You shall not pass. Yeah, they offered Gandalf to Connery, but he turned it down because he couldn't understand the story. Then he said, well, then I did this League of Extraordinary Gentlemen because I didn't understand the story with that. And I couldn't understand the story. It must be good. Must be a big hit. Anyway, guys, I'll see you all next time. Have a great, great day. Great fool of a took. Next time, throw yourself in and rid us of your stupidity.